Well, after what felt like 100 years, a lifetime, they finally resolved this whole Tyson Fury, Dylan White scenario. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if Joshua was going to step aside. We didn't know if Usyk was going to fight Fury. We didn't know if Dylan White was going to step aside. But it feels like now we've finally got a resolution to it with Dylan White now finally scheduled to fight for that WBC belt. For a moment, it did feel like Joshua was going to step aside and not fight Usyk the second time, which it's funny to me because a lot of people felt like that was the correct move. But now, with Fury fighting White, we obviously know now that those two, Joshua and Usyk, will now be scheduled to fight. So, what I really want to dive into here when it comes to this sort of scenario is actually the whole Joshua Usyk thing, because people now have a set perception about this fight. They kind of feel like it's a foregone conclusion what's going to happen in the second fight. They feel like Usyk is going to school AJ again, he's going to outbox him again. But I remember, right, before this fight got announced, actually when this fight got announced, everybody was clamouring for AJ Fury. It was the fight that everybody wanted, myself included. But I just remember looking at this fight, and people can go back on my Twitter to even look at this. I was excited for this fight, not because, I'm a fan of Usyk and AJ, but not because of specifically the matchup, but just the intrigue. You've got Usyk, who's coming up in weight, an undisputed cruiserweight champion, fighting the unified heavyweight champion of the world, the guy who's been that, even though he lost to Reese, has been that for quite a while. So it was just really intriguing. And to me, this was the one fight with Joshua where I felt this would cement. If he beat Usyk, I always felt that would really cement his legacy, because you're beating a guy who, I think, even if with Fury's wins over Wilder and Klitschko, isn't, those guys I just don't think are on the level of Usyk. The way he moves, the way he thinks, the way he just breaks opponents down, it's different. So I highlighted 5 points that I want to go into here. So the first point is, like I said before, the reception beforehand. When this fight got announced, like I said, everybody was upset about Fury and Joshua, and everybody kind of wrote this fight off, said it was Joshua's just fighting a cruiserweight. Obviously, the casuals said this. Everybody knows what Usyk is if you know boxing. He's an elite fighter, and people were intrigued by it, but I felt like there was almost, because it wasn't the big fight, it was not as hyped up as maybe it could have been, or maybe it should have been. It got more hyped, I think, the more closer the fight drew closer. And with the fight being in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, they really built it up as a huge fight. But beforehand, remember after the Chisora fight, everybody was saying about Usyk how he couldn't handle the heavyweight division, how Wilder would bully him, how Joshua Fury, they would all just make short work of him. And you look at it now, it's so, that narrative has completely switched. And with Joshua, he just beating Pulev, I felt like he got a lot of unnecessary stick in that fight, Joshua. I think he did what he needed to do in that fight. I think he boxed quite well, but again, in hindsight now, maybe looking back, maybe he didn't really look that fantastic in comparison to what maybe he could have done, especially against a guy like Pulev, who, you really, a heavyweight at Joshua's level should be getting rid of him quite easily, you'd think, especially at the level he's at in his career. But the Chisora fight seemed to really sway a lot of people in the favour of Joshua, and no matter what nobody says, the majority of people thought Joshua was going to win that fight. Everybody called it. I called it. I thought he would. I didn't think he'd stop him. I thought he'd maybe get a decision. I thought he maybe would rough him up a bit more, use his size. Evidently, that wasn't the case. But it was the sort of perception that Joshua was going to be too big, too strong, and was just going to be too much for him. Now, one thing that kind of not worried me per se, because as much as I like Joshua, I don't have a huge affiliation to him, but one thing that worried me, and it was just something that happened in the Ruiz fight as well, where Joshua almost he has his attitude sometimes, Joshua, where he's such a nice guy, so chilled out, so relaxed, that he does this thing where he'll take selfies with his opponents before fights, and it really didn't feel like he really was in the zone, but it didn't feel like he was really almost seizing what the challenge was. You see sometimes some fighters, when they've got a huge challenge in front of them, you see a lot with Canelo actually, he always recognises when he's in a fight. You can see there's a difference between when he's in the weigh-ins, between when he's at the press conferences beforehand, and when he's in the fight. There is a demeanour that he just has, which I don't think Joshua has it. He had it a little bit in the Dylan White fight, even in the Klitschko fight, but he felt so at ease in the Ruiz fight, and then the Usyk fight, he felt similar. So I don't know, you can be friendly with your opponents, but I would really prefer it. Like, my favourite fighter in boxing is Errol Spence. My favourite MMA fighter is Kamaru Usman. These are guys who are just stone cold. When they have a fight, there's just a real stoicness to them, which I just don't think Joshua really has. And it's not saying he's not a fighter, he is, obviously, but it's just something sometimes is missing with Joshua, and I think that's something that I'd be interested to see what happens in his second fight with Usyk, if he has that, if he's stone cold, or if he is still a bit trying to be friendly, or even if he's a bit nervous, because mentally he seems a bit all over the place at the moment. But that's one thing I find interesting. Narrative before this first Usyk Joshua fight was Joshua would blow him out, but that didn't happen. Then the fight happened, and I remember watching it, and after the first 2 rounds, you kind of have a feeling what was going to happen. The way Usyk was moving, he really was just playing with Joshua in there. The movement was too much, and people tend to forget, but Joshua did have some good rounds in the middle rounds, like 6, 7, 8, I think it may have been, where he did a lot of good work to the body. If you look at Usyk's face after the fight, it wasn't like he was clean or anything. He was in a real war. He did a great job, Usyk, though, of adapting. That's what he does so well. That's what, same thing with Lomachenko does well. There's a point where he almost mentally breaks his opponent in there, and it feels like they almost become exhausted. And that's what happened to Joshua at the end of the 12th, where he just looked completely out on his feet. It looked like he really didn't know what to do in there. And in the fight, I think there's a narrative with this fight where Usyk is just on another level to Joshua. Joshua has no chance. He's everything that everybody says he is, but there's something, like, I think people almost sometimes miss, and this happens a lot with all type of fights, but it's very rare that you have two fighters in a big fight who fight at their absolute best. You know, people often talk about the first Canelo and Triple G fight and how Triple G won the fight, and he did. I don't think many can deny it. But I never thought Canelo fought at his best, and I always felt that Canelo was essentially the one who made that fight what it was. He made it easier for Triple G to apply the pressure and back him up against the ropes. In the second fight, you saw when Canelo actually asserted himself a bit more, it was a lot closer. And I had it a draw the second fight, but if you had to give a win, I would give it to Canelo, because I think he was, I don't want to say the Morata, I haven't got the copybook numbers in front of me, but he just felt like he really made the necessary adjustments in that fight. And with Joshua, he did not fight to the best of his ability, mainly because he fought a fight. He tried to box with the boxer. It's not something that anybody thought he should do. You know, you wouldn't play chess with a master chess player. You know, you wouldn't go all out attacking against a fantastic football team. There's so many different connotations you can use, but you have to fight the fight to your strengths. You have to use what you have and make your opponent suffer, and that is just not what Joshua did. He has, people talk about him being a bodybuilder, but that being a bodybuilder is actually an advantage, because when you're up close, especially in the clinch, Chisora was able to bully Usyk, and Joshua, he can't do it the same way as Chisora. He hasn't got that same style, like they say, styles makes fights, but I felt like Joshua really could have asserted himself a lot more. I just used his size, but he just didn't. And him going to a lower weight, everybody felt like that was what he should do. He should be lighter. But in my opinion, just own what you are. You are a big bodybuilder type of fighter. He's got big arms, big muscles. Just own it and be that. Yes, you may get gassed out in a few rounds, but you know what? That's who you are. You know, we've seen in the weekend with Francis Ngannou. He is the same as Joshua. Someone who, after a few rounds, will start to fatigue, but he knows what he has and he tries to work with it. He doesn't try to change what he is. And I think Rob McCracken and AJ's team have almost tried to change him to the point where it's actually hurting him as a fighter. And again, I think Shane Fury and IFL made a good point of, it almost felt like his coaches and his team were almost trying to get him through the fight. And that's probably why they didn't encourage him to really go for it. Because if he really had gone for AJ, maybe he would have got knocked out, but he might have also knocked Usyk out. You don't know. It's heavyweight boxing. One punch can change all sorts. It's the one division in boxing that is like that. So the fight itself, I think, transpired in a way where Usyk was good. He could have been better, but also Joshua could have been better. Usyk himself even said that he thought Joshua was going to be a lot harder than what he expected, or a lot tougher than what he expected in the ring. I'm not surprised he said that, because Joshua barely threw any meaningful shot in that fight. You know, he threw a few at the body and that was it. And yeah, so I just think that what happened in the fight. People look at fights in their own sort of point of view, their own narrative. they'll look at it usually from one side, but really, I always think that in boxing, in MMA, even in anything in the sport, there's always shades of grey. It's not just black and white. Joshua got schooled by Usyk. Usyk was good, but Joshua could have fought a hell of a lot more and could have really asserted his size, because the size difference is a big one. Even though Ud didn't look it on the night, Joshua is a natural heavyweight. He can never fight a cruiserweight ever. Him and Fury are the two best examples, I think, of heavyweights in this heavyweight division, because they are big. And with Usyk, he's big, but he's kind of, I don't know, he kind of fills out the division quite well, but it doesn't really feel like he's naturally suited to the division. The one thing, like I said, which I think had went from, and I always felt that this would go from, is that in terms of a pure boxer, there's nobody in that division who comes close to him, including Tyson Fury. People talk about Fury as a great boxer, and he is, but he's a great boxer for the heavyweight division. Usyk is just a great boxer overall. You know, he has everything, and you saw in the Joshua fight, he started off very, very quick and was able to sustain it for the whole of the fight. In the Tony Bellew fight, he started off slow and he was able to pick up on it and finish Bellew in the end. So, and you look at what he did to like Gassiev in the cruiserweight, like he does. He's somebody who, his boxing brain is far beyond Joshua's, but I've seen like I think Lomachenko's brain is more. I think he's got higher boxing IQ with Teofimo Lopez, but he still lost the fight. You know, sometimes the better boxing brain doesn't always equal, you know, you're automatically going to win. Sometimes in boxing there's different things that come into play. There is speed, there's power, there's athleticism, there's your stamina, there is weight, there's weight. You know, there is a lot of things that go into it. So the reaction after the fight, and this is my fourth point, which I found with the Ruiz fight, I always felt that it was almost overanalyzed a little bit, the Ruiz fight. Joshua in that fight, yeah, he didn't look right. I agree. Before the fight, he looked, I don't know where he was. He was just not with it. But in the fight, people loved to say that he got exposed, that he's a fraud. But hindsight, he knocked a man down, tried to finish him, and he got caught. I've seen it happen so many times, and he just couldn't recover. I've seen it happen so much in boxing, so much in MMA. It's just something that happens. He isn't the first, and he won't be the last to do it. And in the rematch, he did what he needed to do. So I didn't really overanalyze that loss too much, to be honest. I did think that I had doubts about Ron McCracken, you know, a long time before that. This was a guy, he's a good trainer, Ron McCracken, don't get it twisted, but this is a man who had Carl Froch fighting at 35 with his hands all the way down by his waist, and he kind of, again, he's a good coach, but he isn't somebody who I would consider a defensive aficionado. I always just had doubts there, and I always thought Joshua. I think Usyk will lose in this heavyweight division. I think Fury will. I don't know if any of these heavyweights will go undefeated for the whole of their career, unless they retire before they want to, like before they kind of enter their last stages of their career, like maybe when they're exiting their prime. But with Joshua in the Usyk fight, it was different to the Ruiz fight. The Ruiz fight, he just got caught finishing, it happens, and he made the amends in the second fight. In the Usyk fight, it was different. He got schooled from round 1 to round 12. Maybe not schooled, 6, 7, it was close. But in the fight, he just got thoroughly beaten. That's worse than getting finished, in my opinion, because there's one thing just getting finished. You have guys who maybe can land a lucky punch. It can happen. I don't really believe in lucky punch, but you could make the argument. But when you get beaten thoroughly through the whole fight, you get outclassed, especially the way Joshua did in Tottenham. That doesn't just have physical, it has mental effects on you. And with Joshua, the thing that I've seen recently is in the first Ruiz fight, I feel like he just had a lot of people going against him, and he kind of didn't like that. Here, it's almost like he's questioning himself a little bit. And you've seen in interviews, he's kind of going around different trainers in America. It looks like he's going to get a new trainer, but we don't know who that is. And the rematch isn't that far away. I don't think it will be anyway, because they haven't announced it yet officially. So, you know, this feels like it had a different effect on AJ. With Usyk, it just seems like his business is normal. He's somebody who, one thing that's great about him and why I think he will go down as one of the greats is he was willing to fight anywhere. So this second fight, it won't be, I hope it's in Ukraine, but I don't think it will be. It'll probably be in Abu Dhabi, Saudi, or in London or wherever. But Usyk is very much, like I talked about before with Errol Spence and with Usman, a very stoic professional, a very a professional, actually, is probably the best word I could use. He gets in there, does the job and goes. With Joshua, there's always more to him. There's almost like he's always overanalyzed a little bit because he's always in the public eye. He's always doing stuff. He's on every ad in the whole of the UK, whether it's Lucozade, whether it's the Lynx advert, whether it's Under Armour. I don't know, it feels like it's almost all closing in on him a little bit. And it's almost now today, it feels like... I always felt with Joshua, when he started his career, that he was hyped up from so early. Everybody was talking about him being, this great fighter, great champion. He was built up as the next thing of British boxing. Everyone was calling him a superstar before he even done anything. You look at the hype he got when he had the fight with Charles Martin. It was almost like it was supposed to happen. Everything was so built up for him to win. And even when he fought Klitschko, he might have won that fight, but I felt at the time that he was never ready for that fight. He won, credit to him, but they didn't really... Sometimes fighters get a lot of stick for not taking the toughest fight straight away, but sometimes building your career is what makes these fighters what they are. Floyd Mayweather really wasn't that well known until he was about 30-something fights into his career, or wasn't the guy he was until 30 fights. You need a lot of experience to really get to that point, and Joshua should have been built up slowly. He shouldn't have been in the public image that much. He shouldn't have been on his massive show. He should have built it up slow, but unfortunately, because of the gold medal and because of who he is, it was too much too soon, in my opinion. I think the same thing's happening with Campbell Hatton a little bit, and it happened to Amir Khan, I think, as well. Look at Conor Benn as an example of someone he's kind of built up, but he's, I think, now on the right path where he's taking these fights, like the Algeria fight. They're all kind of fights which I think will eventually prepare him for the likes of maybe a Spencer Crawford, a John Ennis, these type of fighters. And I think in the long term that will benefit Conor Benn. And I don't think what happened with AJ has really benefited him because he hasn't been able to learn. He's almost had to learn on the job a little bit. And again, it feels like everything's almost closing in around him. And the reaction, like I said, the narrative has flipped. Before the Usyk fight, it was he'll beat Usyk. He's too big, too strong. Anthony Joshua, he's the heavyweight champion. Usyk's just a cruiserweight. But now the narrative is Usyk is too much for him. He'll school him again. It's not even going to be close. And, he should just forget it. A lot of people thought he should have took the step aside. Me personally, I thought he should have, but not for the reasons that everybody thought. I thought he should have because sometimes as fighters, because of these contracts and rematch clauses, which should all be just eliminated in my opinion, there's never time for a fighter to learn from a loss and have a few fights. Lennox Lewis, when he lost to Oliver McCall, he didn't fight him straight away. He took a few fights to really get some wins back and get his momentum back under him, and I think that would have been good for Joshua. This is why I was kind of hoping this Usyk Fury fight was going to happen, because whilst I love for Dylan White to finally get his shot at the WBC belt, I just think that would have been good for Joshua. But now he's it almost feels like, again, the situation is a bit crazy. He's had to almost go from being someone who was maybe going to take some other fights. He looked like he was about to take the step aside to now he's going to fight Usyk again. And my sort of thoughts on this whole situation today is I think Joshua can beat Usyk in this rematch. He has the skill. He has in compared to Usyk, he hasn't, but he has the size as well. He's a heavyweight. And it might sound stupid, but there are heavyweights and there are like real heavyweights. Joshua is as heavyweight as you can get. He is, just like I said, perfect for the division. And I don't think that the one way to win is for him just to impose his size, but I think just really, again, I'm not a coach, but if you look at what Teofimo Lopez did to Lomachenko, he bullied Lomachenko in that fight. Lomachenko himself said that he felt too big in there for him, and he did it in a way where he wasn't just using his size, but he was cutting off the ring. He was making it hard for Lomachenko to do anything. Joshua met Usyk right in the middle of the ring and didn't really once try to cut off the ring. And Usyk, he's good, he's great, in fact, but he's not unbeatable. We've seen Tony Bellew have success. We've seen other fighters have success. We saw Chisora have a lot of success against him. And I kind of look at him, Usyk, and I think he's had, 3 fights now at heavyweight? He's looked good. I thought he did look good in the Chisora fight. I just think it was just harder than maybe it could have been for him. He looked good in the Joshua fight. And against Witherspoon, he looked pretty good. But again, the opponent wasn't fantastic. But I think Usyk, he's still, I don't know, there seems to be, I feel like you do need to see him in there with maybe another fight with Joshua or another heavyweight, just to really, to me, judge where he is at a heavyweight. He's definitely amongst we talk about Fury, Wilder, Joshua, he's definitely in that group. He's probably, as a boxer, like I said, the best out of all of them put together, to be honest. But yeah, I think with this whole scenario with Joshua and Usyk, I just do think it's a really interesting case of like how the public can be easily swayed. And obviously the first fight was so in Usyk's favour, I get it, but the way so many people were so on thinking Joshua was going to win to now completely flipping and go on the other side, it just shows how quickly these things can change in boxing. And yeah, I do think Joshua can beat Usyk in this rematch, but I just would hope that because again, as a fighter, I don't really care that much for AJ. I think he's decent, not that great. Personality-wise is the only reason why I really root for him, to be honest. But, for Britain, it's good for the whole of the heavyweight division. It's great for boxing if you can have, I don't want to say Joshua winning, but if you have Joshua as a fighter who is fighting at his best, because the heavyweight division's, I don't know if I would say, I don't think it's the best division. It's not my favourite division, but it's definitely the one with the most characters and the most interesting sort of enigmas. You have Fury, he's so big and so awkward, but he's just so good, and he's so charismatic. You have Wilder, who's very loud and abrasive, but he has that one touch of death. You have Usyk, who's this slick technician. You have Joshua, who's this big, nice guy, but he's also, when he lets his hands go, there's not many better combination punches in the whole of the division. So it's a small division, and like I said before, I think they all will lose, because I'd hope anyway that they all do fight each other. But to me, this sort of situation with Joshua Usyk, I will be interested to see how the build-up is to this fight the second time around. It'd be interesting if Joshua has that eye, that sort of fire in the head in the Dillian Whyte fight. If he had, even in the Klitschko fight to an extent, when he said that to Klitschko that you're going to, in the next round you're gone, that's the sort of fire you need, and it feels like it's almost been burnt out of him a little bit. So yeah, I would hope that Joshua can come back, that he can show it. Hopefully, I say hopefully, again, I'm always a guy who, I don't really have that much, there are certain fights I like, but I don't really have that much of a preference in the fight. I always just want the best fighter to win, and Usyk was that fighter back in September, but now, be interesting. Will Joshua use his size again? Will he use his size and not try to box Usyk again, or will he do the same thing? And is he mentally gone now, Joshua? Is this going to be something where it stays with him for a long time? Because if he can come back, I think it'd be a great story, but there's just so many questions in this scenario. This ain't going to be the first video I'm doing it. When the fight gets announced, I'll do more, but yeah, that's just my thoughts on this whole Joshua Usyk scenario. And yeah, thank you for listening, and my next video will be the preview of the Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker fight, so I'll see you then.